Welcome to episode 1 of the Bass Players Book Club. Now, over the years I've managed to amass a fairly embarrassingly large collection of instructional materials, whether it's books, CDs, DVDs, even VHS tapes, I am that old, digital downloads, apps, you name it. I've bought it, tried it for about 3 days, and then moved on to the next thing in the hope that it will magically make my playing better. The fact of the matter is that not all books are created equal. So in this series, I'm going to examine 5 or so of my favourite books and the ones that have had the biggest positive impact on my musical development. What I thought it would actually be better to do in the first instance is cover the worst book that I've ever encountered, the book that I've wasted the most time on, and the book that I feel has actually hindered my musical development rather than helped it. And this actually ties in nicely with a bunch of things that I've seen on the internet that upset me on a bass technique level because they're either musically irrelevant or they're potentially damaging. And this is stuff that you don't just see on lowest common denominator trash like Musician, but also on fairly reputable sites like No Treble. The book in question is Bass Fitness, released in 1991, and it comes with a number of glowing endorsements from prominent bass players, music schools and magazines on the back cover. It also has a number of positive reviews on Amazon.com, but just because something is incredibly popular doesn't mean that it has any musical merit whatsoever. A couple of years ago, I had a clear out of all my embarrassing teenage instructional purchases, which mainly consisted of Stu Ham Hot Licks videos, and I actually ended up shredding my copy of Bass Fitness because I didn't want anyone else to get hold of it and waste as much time with it as I had. Bass Fitness begins with the classic 1, 2, 3, 4 finger independence exercise in the lowest register of the bass, before progressing through every single permutation of that and then adding more difficulty by including string skipping and other variations. Ultimately, you get a total of 200 exercises designed to improve your control, independence and endurance in your fretting hand. My main objection to the book, aside from the cover art, is that it doesn't actually contain any music in it whatsoever. It plays on the bass community's pervasive obsession with technique and tries to sell you the idea that the one thing that you need in the world more than anything else is more chops, which is simply not true. I bought the book at about the age of 16 and it formed the core of my warm-up routine for about 3 years. I probably would have spent between 30 and 45 minutes every day that I practiced working on these patterns. Now that's a lot of time wasted if you add that up. And the benefit of hindsight is that I can look back over the last 18 years of bass playing and see that the things that have brought about the greatest improvement in my technique have been taken from musical concepts and not digital patterns. The book actually represents 2 distinct areas of bass education which I feel are rife with misinformation. The first is what you should practice in order to improve your musicianship and your bass playing, and that is really not technique. The second is how you go about organising your fretting hand in a logical, secure way according to where you are on the neck and the context of the music that you are playing. Now, the concept behind Bass Fitness is entirely admirable. The argument that it puts forward is that in order to be an effective bass player, you need equal amounts of independence and control between the 4 digits on your fretting hand. I completely agree with that. You can't really argue with that. What I disagree with is the separation of technical exercises from musical concept. You shouldn't have to put an extra step in the process of learning music. Don't divorce instrumental technique from musical concept. There's no need to do that. Why would you want to waste your time practicing something that you can't use out in the real world, something that doesn't function over musical concepts, something that isn't designed to be put into practice on a gig or a recording session, whatever, it doesn't matter what it is. If you try and play any of the patterns in the book, they sound like garbage because they're not derived from music. They're basically fretboard algebra and nothing more. Instead, why not use musical ideas? Why not find a musical concept that works on any perceived weakness that you might have in your fretting hand and then use that instead as a practice tool? That way you're practicing musical content, you're improving your knowledge of harmony, and you're training your ears all at the same time, as well as developing your level of technique. So if anyone, doesn't matter who it is, anyone at all, tries to recommend, or even worse, sell you these sorts of digital pattern exercises, they might be dressed up as other things like string crossing drills or super secret pro level killer chop building technique hacks. Anything that divorces technique from music, that means that they are a witch, and as such, they should be burnt at the stake.
What do you do with witches?
Authors and educators absolutely love selling technique lessons because you can stretch out any concept of technique almost infinitely. It's like an infinite wormhole that you can kind of drag out to fill the time available, and spin out lesson courses or monthly magazine articles for as long as you need to. And it gives the viewer or the reader the impression that they are developing their musical skills when you're not actually teaching them anything musical at all. You're just giving them fretboard aerobics to participate in. So I always laugh when I see adverts for so-called advanced bass techniques or any sort of extended technique lesson, because I don't believe that there are any advanced techniques for the bass. I'm not talking about double thumbing or flamenco slap or 8-finger sweep tapping licks. Those sorts of circus skills exist on 0.01% of gigs, if that. And my main concern is what I have to do in the real world and the things I have to do to get through the gigs that I participate in. And yes, there's advanced music, it's complex rhythm, melody and harmony, but in terms of the technique, there are a few fundamentals which often get overlooked, but there are several concepts that can be taught very easily within a couple of weeks, should be taught within a couple of weeks, so you can get technique out of the way and get into studying music, the essential elements of music. And that's what takes the time, getting fluent in rhythm, melody and harmony. That's where our focus should be. We need to stop practicing all this technique all the time in the hope that some music might magically appear, and instead focus on the elements of music and know that our level of technique will naturally evolve as we get deeper into the music. So, first point, how do you develop your technique without resorting to these digital pattern exercises? So a problem area that I frequently see, both in students and actually in my own playing, is difficulty leading with either the third or the fourth finger on the fretting hand. So the bass fitness approach is to do these sorts of exercises where you have, or the classic sort of 2-finger walking exercises across the fretboard. Neither of those things are particularly musical, so practicing them is really a waste of time. Can we find something better that actually comes from music? What we need to do is find a musical idea that forces us to play a semitone between our third and our fourth fingers. So how about a major 7 arpeggio? Let's not play C major because everyone does everything in C. Let's do it in B flat, still an easy key. So B flat major 7, 2 octaves. Note the different shifting points, ascending and descending. Subtle but important. Let's put that in groups of 3 going up. So B flat major 7, groups of 3 ascending. So I can already feel my third and fourth fingers working pretty hard on that. That's going to be intensified if I reverse it. So still B flat major 7, groups of 3, but in reverse, descending as we ascend. You'll notice that I'm not using a metronome deliberately when I play these things. That's because the tempo is not important. What is important is articulation, note length, having clean shifts, and if we hit a problem area, we should be free to spend a little bit more time there and sort of stretch out the tempo as we see fit. And that idea of just having a metronome on in the background in the same room just for the sake of it when you're working on these things, that will not improve your time. That will do nothing for your time whatsoever. So it's fairly pointless. Also, the reason for not doing things with a metronome is already I can feel my ego getting in the way and telling me to play these things faster than I should be playing. So always resist that temptation. Always practice things a lot slower than you think you need to or you want to play them. And that way you make sure that everything is done absolutely perfectly all the time. Let's try, same idea, groups of 4. So B flat major 7, groups of 4 ascending. missed out a group on the way down there. Now I can already feel that thing is pretty challenging. So I play it a few times at a slow tempo just to really get comfortable with it. Groups of 5 ascending. Even more of a challenge. How about groups of 5 descending? There's that troublesome group. That's pretty ropey. Let's try that again. So once you've got comfortable with that, you can take that concept and apply it to other things. So if you haven't done so yet, get familiar with how to start any chord type, any arpeggio from this half of your hand. You probably already know ways to start them from this half. How about leading with the third and fourth finger? So very briefly, we've just exhaustively done major sevenths. You could also start it like this. Starting from the little finger. Minor sevenths. Again, starting with the little finger. Dominant sevenths. Or with the little finger. What else is left? Half diminished. Leading with the third finger at that time, because the diminished arpeggio means that you have to start on the third finger. So get comfortable with all of those things, and that will help to develop that independence there. All of this stuff is challenging for that particular technical problem, and the best thing about it is we're using music all the time. All these things are derived from musical concepts that you will encounter regardless of your musical goals or the genres that you decide to play in. All these musical facts stay true regardless of what you might be involved with. So as if wasting your time on completely non-musical exercises masquerading as technique drills wasn't bad enough, my real gripe with bass fitness and other things of that type are that they imply that you should be using one finger per fret in the lowest area of the instrument, which is completely ridiculous. The first exercise in the book is this sort of thing. Now, look what that does to my wrist. Having one finger per fret puts my wrist in that horrible hyperflexed position, which puts loads of stress and strain on the fretting hand. Even if I'm using my thumb to pivot and get across there, my hand just feels stressed out doing that. And in fact, a lot of the reviews on Amazon, interestingly, say that some of the exercises are painful, but that's okay, no pain, no gain, right? Right if you want tendinitis or RSI. Now, one finger per fret works really well up in the higher registers of the bass, and sometimes you have to use it lower down in the instrument because the music dictates it. That's fine, but it shouldn't be our go-to thing. It shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all endeavour, because music isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. You need to adapt to the situation. So one thing that I see all the time that drives me mad and makes me feel slightly unwell is something that I see surprisingly commonly, and it's particularly acute in people who come from a guitar playing background, because the guitar has a vastly reduced scale length. It's basically a toy. It means that you can get around it using one finger per fret all the time. And the way that it manifests itself is this sort of thing, where you have 1 and 3 doing all the work. You end up playing octaves like that. Now again, if I turn around, my wrist's in a horrible position. If I substitute that third finger for the fourth finger, boom, straight away my wrist flattens out almost entirely. Much more secure than 1 and 3. Okay. The thing about it, the bass, is that no one plays it like that. No one actually plays bass like that. If you go and find any bass player who knows anything about anything, they will not do that. They will not be seen dead doing that. They will do that instead because it makes way more sense on many levels. So the way that we actually get around the bass in the lowest register is to steal technique from the double bass. Obviously the double bass is much bigger, much more physical to play, and therefore you have to have your technique in order, otherwise you hurt yourself. So I started adopting this sort of technique way before I even thought about getting into double bass playing. My teacher at music college was Stefan Rettenbacher, the great Austrian bass titan, and he introduced me to Franz Mendels' new method for the double bass, which was published in about 1904, so not really that new. But what that does is it gets your fretting hand to organise itself across the span of 3 frets rather than 4. So the way to test this out is to take your fretting hand, drop it by your side, and just shake out all the tension that might be there. And then, without changing anything about your hand, just bring it up and observe your natural hand position. So your fingers will probably curve over towards your palm, and there'll be a nice gap between your thumb and your fingers that we can just slot the neck of the bass into. Again, I haven't changed my hand position at all. It's completely a natural hand posture. So there, my fingers naturally occupy 3 frets of the instrument. And actually that applies, if I drag it up, that applies to around about the 8th or 9th fret. Okay, so to that end, I tend to use this approach to technique as much as possible in most of the instrument. Actually, only using 1 finger per fret when it's entirely necessary and it's dictated by the music. That's the most important factor. So with this, whatever position you happen to be in, first finger occupies the 1st fret, 2nd fret notes are covered by the 2nd finger, and then 3 and 4 team up to play notes on the 3rd fret. We don't really use the 3rd finger for fretting notes at all, if possible. So you get that idea if I play something a little bit more musical. Let's try an F major scale. Now, that means that my wrist can stay fairly flat and that my fingers aren't stretching or straining. I can still get the notes out in a reasonably musical way. Contrast that with trying to play. That reaching between the 1st and 3rd fret with 1 and 3 just feels completely horrible to my fretting hand. It's getting pretty stressed out. Now, if we have to play notes outside of that 3 fret span, let's imagine that we're in F minor. Rather than using the 1 finger per fret approach, we're going to use a mini position shift and still go 1, 2, and then 3 and 4 combined. So if I play that, I had a little thumb pivot, grab the G with my 2nd finger, and then the little finger plays the A flat. Much better. If you try and debate this sort of thing with anyone who's really into 1 finger per fret, as I have tried to do several times on the internet, with people who shall remain nameless, their argument is that if you use the 3 fret span approach, that you're somehow like an ancient relic, you're a dinosaur, that you can't play fast. And actual retorts I've got to questions have been, oh, well, what do you do if you need to play fast in F sharp or D flat? Well, I can use 1 finger per fret, or I can play pretty reasonably well using a 3 fret span. I have the choice, and that's the idea. Sometimes using 1 finger per fret is completely unavoidable, and that's fine, but you need to make sure that you're pivoting as much as possible. Let's think of a line that I play using 1 finger per fret down here. So all of that had that approach, but I was making sure that I pivoted all the time, and my elbow was doing a hell of a lot of work to make sure that I wasn't stressed out. You can't have one technique and try and apply it to everything that you do. You have to adapt depending on the musical context. It's not a case of only ever using 1 finger per fret exclusively or always sticking to the 3 fret span. It's actually about having both of them in your head at once and dipping in and out of whichever one is most appropriate depending on the musical situation that you happen to be in. So it's kind of analogous to George Orwell's concept of doublethink from 1984, believe it or not. So this idea of having 2 seemingly completely contradictory beliefs in your head at the same time and having them both be correct. So for some things, 1 finger per fret is the best, even if that means it's being down here. I just have to be sensible about it. And then sometimes, even from up here, the 3-fret span is the way to go, because it's more comfortable. The overriding factor is always, what does the music demand? So that's the thing. Always be aware of what the music calls for, rather than what your technique obliges you to do.